Every year, on the same foggy morning in late autumn, billionaire Richard Monroe made his silent pilgrimage to the grave of his only son. Known to the world as a ruthless tycoon, Richard allowed no emotion to pierce the polished armor he wore in public. But here, in this quiet cemetery, away from boardrooms and headlines, he was simply a father, haunted by loss and unanswered questions. He stepped out of his sleek black limousine, the chill biting through his tailored coat. In his hand, he held a single white rose, the same offering he brought every year. His footsteps echoed on the wet stone path as he approached the familiar headstone. But this time, something was off. As he neared the grave, he paused. A young woman was already there, kneeling on the damp grass. She wore a faded waitress uniform, her shoulders trembling as she cried. Her hand rested gently on the headstone, and beside her stood a small boy, no older than 5, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers with both hands. Richard frowned, taken aback. He had never seen them before. Who were they? What were they doing at Daniel's grave? His mind raced with suspicion and confusion, but mostly with a strange sense of unease. These strangers seemed out of place, yet heartbreakingly connected to the spot he'd come to mourn in solitude. As the child looked up and met his eyes, Richard felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. A ripple of something unknown, something human. Richard stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or walk away. But his curiosity, and something deeper, compelled him forward. He cleared his throat gently. The woman turned, startled. Her eyes were red, her face pale but kind. The boy instinctively moved closer to her, clutching her arm. "I'm sorry," Richard said, his voice quieter than he intended. "This is my son's grave. Daniel Monroe." The woman nodded slowly. "I know. I'm Emily." Richard blinked, his brows tightening. "Did you know him?" She hesitated, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes. He was a friend. A good man. The best I've ever known." Richard studied her face, trying to place her in the world his son once inhabited. He had thought he knew everything about Daniel, his habits, his friends, his world. But this woman didn't belong to the elite circles his son had grown up in. Her uniform, her gentle voice, the bouquet of wildflowers, nothing about her matched the lifestyle Daniel was born into. "And the boy?" Richard asked, glancing at the child who was now silently watching him with wide, curious eyes. Emily placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "This is Liam." The boy stepped forward slightly. "Mommy says Daniel was my angel." The word struck Richard like a lightning bolt. His lips parted, but no words came out. The wind rustled the trees overhead, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The billionaire felt the first cracks forming in the wall he had built around his heart. They moved to a nearby bench beneath a quiet tree. Richard sat stiffly, still processing the boy's words. Emily held Liam close, her voice trembling as she began to speak. "I met Daniel almost 6 years ago. I was working night shifts at a roadside diner just outside the city. He came in late one night, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, not like a rich man, just kind. Tired. We started talking. He listened. Really listened. Richard listened too now, his eyes fixed on her. He came back every week. Never told me who he really was. Just said he liked the peace there. I was alone, barely making rent. One month, I was about to be evicted, and suddenly, my landlord told me the payment had been made. No name. But I knew it was Daniel." She paused, eyes glassy with memory. "He helped me, not with money, but with hope. He made me believe I mattered." Richard clenched his jaw, emotion swelling inside him. "Why didn't he tell me? Why keep you a secret?" Emily shook her head. "Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he wanted one part of his life that wasn't tied to your world." She gently ran her fingers through Liam's hair. I never got to tell him I was pregnant. He died before I could. Richard looked at the boy again, his grandson. A living piece of the son he had lost. And suddenly, the silence he'd buried his grief in began to crumble. The drizzle began to fall, light and steady, as Richard sat in silence. His hands, usually firm and commanding, now trembled in his lap. Across from him sat the boy, Liam, his innocent eyes still fixed on the stranger he didn't yet know was family. You're saying, he never told you who he really was? Richard asked, his voice hoarse. Emily nodded. Not once. He didn't want to be treated differently. He said money changes people's eyes, and he just wanted to be seen for who he really was. Richard let out a long, shaky breath. For so many years, he had mourned a son he thought he knew. Grieving in silence, thinking of business deals and missed conversations. He had never imagined Daniel had chosen a simpler life, or found love in the corners of the world Richard never looked. He was better than me, Richard whispered. He had a heart I never understood. Emily gently reached into her coat pocket and handed him something small, a folded photograph. It showed Daniel in a booth at the diner, smiling warmly, his arm around Emily, and Liam nestled in her lap, just a baby. Tears spilled freely down Richard's cheeks now. He held the photo as though it were the most fragile thing in the world. I lost my son, he said, voice breaking. And I never even knew the best parts of him. Emily leaned closer. But he lives on, in Liam. You don't have to lose everything, Richard. Not again. And in that moment, something inside him broke, and finally, began to heal. Weeks passed, and the cemetery looked different now. Not just because spring had begun to thaw the ground, but because Richard Monroe had changed. He no longer arrived in silence and solitude. This time, he walked alongside Emily and little Liam, holding the boy's small hand in his own. The grave had fresh flowers, wild and colorful, picked by Liam himself. A tiny toy car rested beside the headstone, placed there with love. Richard knelt slowly, pressing his palm to the stone. I wish I had known, son, he whispered. But I know now. And I'll never let go of what you left behind. Liam sat beside him and looked up with a bright, trusting smile. Grandpa, can we come again tomorrow? Tears welled in Richard's eyes, tears of something unfamiliar, joy. As many times as you want, little one. Emily stood a few steps away, watching the two of them bond in a way she never thought possible. Richard had done more than accept the truth, he had embraced it. He set up a college fund for Liam, offered Emily a grant to open her own cafe, and more than anything, he showed up, every day. He had been a billionaire with everything, and yet nothing. Now, he had no more secrets, no more regrets, just love. As they walked away hand in hand, the wind gently rustled the trees. A sense of peace hung in the air. Because sometimes, the family you lose, leads you to the one you never knew you needed.